All right, hello everyone, and welcome to round number 4 in our 1v1 June tournament. This is, of course, a round-robin tournament, so this time we've got Dubin and Dermas up to the plate, and, well, it's an interesting little map we've got going. There are some high carbon tiles, but not really anything you'd want to go scavenger with. They're so spread out right now. That said, a couple of iron patches, definitely usable. I think this area is where we'll be watching for our players to found in particular. It's close-ish to the water, close-ish to the aluminum, not too far away from the silicon. It's just pretty much as good as you're going to get on this map. A little bit of geotherm available. Food starting very expensive, along with aluminum chems and electronics. Could make for an interesting game. Electronics also being consumed by the neutral colony. So once those get valuable, they're going to stick that way. Nobody in too much of a rush to found. Everybody says, all right, well, I think I've got some spots in mind. And in fact, we do see the scavenger. This is something I was wondering about. I talked about not really a super desirable scavenger location, and I think I mostly stick to that. But what Dubin has managed to do is he found it on top of a fairly large amount of aluminum, which allowed him to push to an upgrade very quickly, despite the high aluminum price. And then he's just going to take 2 high elemental quarries. This is a little awkward for him. This is going to be very expensive in terms of fuel, in terms of just pure fuel consumption, not actual value of fuel, cost, whatever. But it's a lot of fuel that's going to be consumed by these carbon quarries. We're looking at about 0.24 a second there, 0.3 a second there. So he's spending more than half a fuel a second, effectively, in order to get access to his carbon. Not really something you really want to do. And of course, he doesn't have adjacency. He doesn't have the ability to add on additional carbon. So for the early game, this is going to be acceptable. But Dubin's going to have to be concerned about what happens as you push into the late game and you need gradually more and more carbon. Electronics are going to be valuable this game, for example. So he's maybe going to want to be able to look into getting into that. Chemicals are starting valuable this game, so maybe having access to that would be nice. But it's going to be hard for him to do these things because, especially later on, because he is so limited in exactly how much carbon he's pulling in. 4 is not a particularly large amount in the mid and late stages of the game. Dermas, on the other hand, he's just gone for a basic expansive opening. He found a bunch of iron. He threw down in a bunch of iron. And oh, something we hadn't looked at yet, actually, is the fact that there are nukes on the board. Dermas targets out... No, Dubin, excuse me, targets some water. So that knocks the medium down to a trace immediately. Not something that Dermas is going to be happy about. But this will remind Dermas, hey, by the way, nukes are on the table and I'm a scavenger. And we can see that Dermas has already taken advantage of this information very, very quickly. And Dubin suddenly down to 3 carbon a second. He's going to have to maybe look at adding to his carbon production at some point, but he doesn't have a good tile to take. There's a high, but it's way down in the southwest corner here, whereas Dubin is positioned a little bit more to the northeast side of the map. And then after that, you're looking at mediums. And you definitely don't want to take mediums against a nuke, because they'll just be knocked down even faster than those highs. Very awkward situation for Dubin to be in, with nukes on the map in particular. Dermas, meanwhile, he's trying to make some money in farms, but Dubin very effectively cuts him off from this. This is the advantage that Dubin is going to need to push. He wants to take a lead. He wants to do it very effectively and very quickly this game. Absolutely needs to focus on that. It's just cutting off his opponent's profits in every way that he possibly can so he can develop this lead rapidly before these nukes and before this small amount of carbon come into play as serious factors in the late stages of the game. If Dermas gets knocked out too fast, I actually don't like this expansive decision out of Dermas this game. Because if Dermas can't push to the late stages, then Dubin takes it. Because he's a scavenger, he can get the lead very quickly. All of these disadvantages he has are focused in the late game. Meanwhile, Dermas's disadvantages are all focused in the early game. He's an expansive player, doesn't really get any huge benefits early on, and then gradually ramps up to just a sheer ridiculous number of claims in the late game. That's his advantage, right? Also has cheap Offworlds in the late game. So Dermas' advantages are focused in the late game, disadvantages are focused early. Dubin is just the opposite. And so my concern is that Dubin can potentially be so effective in the early game. Look at how much money Dermas is losing per second while these farms are online. And they just now got turned off. For a short time, they were losing massive amounts of money. Dubin can take this advantage so quickly, so fast, that Dermas, he's just going to be stuck. I mean, look at this. Dubin is HQ3, Dermas is HQ2. Dermas, I don't think he could afford that nuke that he threw out against Dubin at all. And I don't think he could afford the water tile he took in a map with underground nukes. Dermas had the option of simply taking this combination water silicon tile a little further away. But that's okay, he's expansive, he has fast ships. That's not going to be too much of a concern for him. But as it stands, Dermas just got nuked out, tried to move into farms, couldn't actually make any food because Dubin had all the water. Dubin then knocks the food price down. Things are looking really awkward. Look at this ridiculous carbon price, by the way, $100. Now, if Dubin is looking to upgrade HQ5, $100 carbon when you're only making 3 a second, not really something you're looking for. If Dubin wants to kill his opponent, though, if he wants to just push for the win on HQ4, then this is something that could definitely work in Dubin's favor. He needs to be able to get this production up at HQ4. He needs to get these glass kilns online. In particular, he needs to transition into reactors. Those are his 2 big priorities right now, right? So that's what we see him trying to do. You can see, though, this carbon price, this is where you're really already feeling it. He can't get these buildings down on HQ4. So he's been HQ4 for a while, but he hasn't actually been able to use that fact. So despite the fact that he hit 4 when Dermas was back at 2, Dermas has managed to effectively push to 3 before Dubin is even using the advantages he got off of 4. And so this has been my concern for Dubin this game. You can really see it coming through here. Dubin, I think, is moving into a position where he's going to want to finish this game rapidly. Now, all of that said, it should also be pointed out that Black Market is extremely strong this game. Extremely strong. There are no claims, but with pirates and EMPs and slowdown strikes and nukes and dynamite and mutinies, look at all those tools that Dubin has to play with if this goes late. So that's going to be kind of his saving grace as long as he has the cash for it. Is he's going to have access to so much Black Market that even if we push to the late stages of the game, then we're potentially going to see him still able to hang on. Congratulations. Dermas takes a geotherm auction for 20. That's something I imagine he's not going to have actually wanted. I mean, 20,000's a lot to pay, and Dermas already has 2 geotherms online, getting the job done. Now, I am a little... Well, Dermas has managed to get into enough water that Dubin can't really keep that price too high. Dermas is still sitting on this dead tile, effectively, of this water pump. That's not doing, well, pretty much anything. Oh, reactors get frozen, though. That's a big deal. So what I wanted to talk about was Dermas has these reactors. He needs to use this reactor money to push into glass so he can push to HQ4. That's kind of what Dermas is looking at right now. Unfortunately for Dermas, because of this Black Market and the fact that Dubin has a lot of money coming in right now, especially from this carbon production, then Dubin's going to be able to keep knocking down these electrolysis reactors, just keep them offline or slowed down, whatever, to keep Dermas from effectively making money. And that's really all Dermas has going for him right now, is these reactors. He's trying to move into farms as well. That's a decent decision. Dubin also very effectively just cutting his opponent off from making money by simply making the money first, right? Dubin had reactors down too. That keeps Dermas from getting too out of control. Dubin, oh man, just look at this cash difference still. Dubin at 4, Dermas at 3. Dermas can't make money. Dubin can push to 5 if he would like to, quite safely. He has such a massive lead at this point that he can pretty easily push to 5, despite the fact that carbon is $200 a piece. And Dermas, I don't know if I really like the fact that he hasn't gotten into carbon himself at this point. We do see a mutiny on the high carbon. And that's potentially nice to see. They've been trading mutinies back and forth there, but it's not going to do anything for Dermas, of course, because Dubin is just going to take it right back immediately. Not actually very effective at the end of the day. You can also see that Dermas is kind of hurting from his positioning here. All of his production is right next to each other instead of being down here in this area, for example, like completely separated. So the EMPs are staying reasonably effective against both groups of production instead of just one. Definitely a bit of a concern. Another nuke coming out from Dermas. That's something he definitely can't afford, but I do understand the move. Where you're just sitting here like, this is disgusting. My opponent's making so many things, but he has this medium carbon. I need to do something about that. So he just goes after the medium carbon tile out of sheer frustration. But that's not the kind of move I think that's going to win you the game, of course, because Dermas needs a lot of cash still to be able to push up in HQ level. His farms are offline. That's the only thing actually making money for him right now. Steel still hasn't come online yet. Just very, very awkward indeed. $32,000 auction for a carbon quarry is what Dermas is going to get with that. I mean, he could afford the debt after having pushed into these geotherms. That's for sure. You can see this previous geotherm auction, by the way, just sitting there from Dermas. So I think Dermas, I didn't like the expansive found. I think we can see why at this point. He didn't have the easy upgrades of a robot that would have allowed him to maybe keep up with Dubin a bit more effectively. Was my big concern. And then of course a couple of misplays with debt have left him in an even worse position. He's gotten a lot of debt off these auctions thus far, and Dubin, making all this money off the carbon price that he drove so high, has an easy transition into electronics that I honestly think he should probably take instead of these glass kilns. Dermas still back on 4. He has managed to push to 4. That's very important for him. But as you can see, Dubin's getting close to being able to go for the majority kill very, very quickly here. Dermas also takes away Dubin's carbon quarry. That was really Dermas' only source of cash, excuse me. These two names, guys. Dermas and Dubin. Not pleasant for me. Anyway. Dubin's on into the electronics. We can see he's making solid money pretty much across the board right now. Not great, but strong enough. And part of the reason it's not great is just because of the slowdown strike at the moment. If that wasn't going on, this oxygen would be pretty nice for Dubin. And he's really, really close at this point to being able to look at the kill. He probably only needs about 40,000 more to actually pull it off. Maybe less, depending on how much the stock price goes up while he goes for the buy. Somewhere between 20, 30, probably a bit more accurate for what he actually needs to kill this off. You can see he's almost got the 5th right now. Dermas is still stuck back. He can buy 1 if he sells down everything. Not something he'll be looking to do with water at its current price, for example. And so, Dubin, as long as he can just hold on, and these electronics factories are going to win the day for him if nothing else does. 100 apiece out of those. Farm's not doing so great. They could be turned off. Similar situation with the electrolysis reactors, but probably no need to make a transition when you've got all this carbon sitting around. You just sell the carbon directly, keep making the electronics, and Dermas is not making any significant amount of money to stop you from just going for the kill. I imagine this game will be wrapped up in just a moment here. All right. Not too much more to talk about in this one, guys. I'll be honest. I'm just kind of resting my voice a little bit. We've got a Mars tile auction. Dermas is going to take it. I mean, that'll clean up the game a little bit faster because Dermas will have more debt, which makes it easier for Dubin to get to the purchase. But it doesn't actually significantly impact the game in any way. Dubin just needs to sell down his carbon and he should be just about there. Oh, Dubin made a mistake of actually making a transition. That is just a straight up mistake. This explains where all of his money is sitting that he doesn't actually have. Like, those buildings didn't even finish by the time the game was over. No reason to do that, but that's okay. Dubin still going to be the one to take the win in round number 4. Yeah, not a single one of those actually finished before the game was done. Oh, man. not a whole lot to look at there. We went over most of it. You could see the early game advantage of Dubin was just too much against the early game deficits of Dermas. I think if this had been a robot, it would have gone better. I think if we hadn't seen this nuke, it would have gone better. This nuke has to come later. It can't come at HQ2, especially not when you're an expansive player. You can wait till late. Late is when the carbon is going to be an issue. So you can save the nuke till a little bit later, and that's going to be okay. Just imagine a world, though, where Dubin needed to push to Offworlds, right? 600 carbon is a lot of carbon to acquire when underground nukes are in the game. And so if we have that world exist, then suddenly Dubin's in trouble. But Dermas was so far behind, he could never force that situation. And so the nuke never really had a significant impact on the game. Even though it lasted for so long, yeah, it took away a lot of carbon, but that was okay for Dubin because he didn't need that carbon in order to maintain his lead. And I think that would have been better committed to potentially a goon squad, like if he had planned around nukes being in the game for this water pump, or just even taking this water pump in the first place. I think we would have seen a very, very different game that time, but that's all right. Offworld Trading Company is a hard game, guys. You got to consider all these different paths that you can take.